All right. So this week one of our stories, one of our authors, I guess I should say, is William Faulkner. And whether you've heard of him or not, William Faulkner is, and whether you agree or not, William Faulkner is often considered America's greatest novelist and one of the great innovators in the early 20th century fiction. Um, he was born in, why is that? That's better. He was born in 1897 in a town outside of Oxford, Mississippi, and he lived most of his life. That's where he died. He lived in. He was born and died in Oxford, Mississippi. Most of his short stories take place in a fictionalized town. I can't pronounce it. Hold on. I can try. Yaknapatawpha. I don't know. It's a fictional town that he created and modeled off of his own hometown in Mississippi. Anyways, he was born in 1897. He was the oldest of, I think, three children. And there's not an incredible, I mean, he's no Ernest Hemingway in that, there are so many, life defining moments that happen to him throughout his life and his career. But he did fight in World War I with the British Royal Air Force, believe it or not, and I have to do more digging in how that happened. But he fought in World War I. He was married a couple of times, and his claim to fame, besides being, a wonderful and innovative American novelist, as his legacy, he was the winner of the Nobel Prize in 1949 for The Sound and the Fury, and he also won two prizes for fiction in 1955 and 1963, respectively. So his writings really explore a wide range of human experiences, whether it's comedically or tragically, in the life of one community. His writings typically have complex plots and narrative styles, which fell out of favor after his Nobel Prize award, because it kind of alienated his readers. But he is recognized as one of the greatest American writers. He died in 1962. Um, After falling from a horse. And he had, it led to thrombosis and it led to a heart attack. So he died at the age of 64 and is buried in a cemetery in Oxford, Mississippi. So his writing style, I kind of alluded to it a little bit in that it fell out of favor because um, it was very modern, it was very experimental in that he uses these fragmented, broken, disjointing plots, and this use, like we talked about last week, this use of stream of consciousness, where he goes, I mean, he's known for these long, many layered sentences that sprawl across paragraphs, right? But it is that kind of stream of conscious interior monologue that we have, that put him clearly in the modernist um, movement. He also has, or he also did use experimental points of view, which we'll talk about this week. And I mean, all of this we'll talk about this week when we look at A Rose for Emily. A lot of people said that, or consider his style to be unsophisticated, but I disagree. It takes real talent to do what he does in in fiction. So um, I guess what I would say really quickly, just a little bit more on his writing style. In addition to his experimentation with narrative structures and temporal frameworks, he also explored the inner consciousness and embraced really embrace these kind of ideas of communities that are steeped in tradition and history, and this kind of in how modernity kind of upheaved those traditions and the things that they held on into from a historical perspective. He is big on symbolism, which we'll talk about in just a second. Um, but and before I move on to talking about A Rose for Emily, I do want to say that it is interesting. He did win the Nobel Prize in 1959, and there is a wonderful recording of it, although people had a very, very hard time understanding his thick southern drawl, and they thought that he was talking nonsense. He was criticized for his acceptance speech until they read the transcript of it, and it's one of it's considered to be one of the best speeches in modern history. So I encourage you guys to look at that. It's really quite interesting, and it is very hard to understand if you don't know anybody from the Deep South. So I'm gonna keep rolling. Our well, William Faulkner is most known for his novels. He did in his early career write a number of short stories that were put together in a an anthology. And the one that we are reading this week is A Rose for Emily, and it is one of the most widely anthologized short stories out there. I mean, you can't get a textbook or an anthology for a literature class and this story not be in it. So A Rose for Emily, it's a very interesting, I mean, I love this story. It's very dark, but also comical, and I mean it's got some it's kind of got some dark humor to it, which I think goes hand in hand with the Southern Gothic tradition. But what is interesting about this story, and what may give some of you all some trouble, like our story that we read, The Jilting of Granny Weatherall and the use of stream of consciousness, this story is also told from a non-chronological perspective. It is broken into fragmented sections. I believe there's four of them. But these fragmented sections are flashbacks of Emily Grierson's life, and they all tell different kind of episodes of what happened to her from the time of her being a young woman in the pre-war South, and to up until her death at the end of her life. We get these varying different stories and various different perspectives. And our story, ironically enough, is going to begin with her funeral because there is this kind of air of mystery of what's going on in Miss Emily's house, and the mysterious disappearance of a friend of hers. So it's because of her funeral that they are able to kind of get to the bottom of this kind of mystery. But it is told from a non-chronological perspective, but it's done so in a way that's not as confusing as The Jilting of Granny Weatherall. I do want to say, pay attention to the things that happen before and after Emily's father's death, and before and after Homer comes into the picture. So the one thing I do want to say, it's broken, it's fragmented, it is part of that experimental narrative thread that William Faulkner is known for, and that these are flashbacks. And the other thing that I want to mention is the flashbacks go hand in hand with the narrative perspective in that it's non-chronological, but it's an interesting it's both third person and first person at the same time. Um, because it's third person because we get the perspective of it's it's a third person masked as first person, if that makes sense. It's told from the collective perspective of we, and it's supposed to be, I mean, it's kind of like I think of it this way. Um, this story is being told to us as readers as if we are a newcomer to town or an outsider who doesn't know town folk legend or lore of the people in the community. So if you look at kind of like small town, it's kind of like a small town, right? And everybody knows everybody. And Miss Emily is the topic of conversation for much of her life. And we are getting that kind of gossipy, if you will, kind of perspective told to us um, through the guise of this story. And it's a very interesting um, technique that he doesn't, and I really kind of like it because what the townspeople don't know, we don't know. So it is that kind of limited perspective, like I said, of third person told through the guise of first person. So, while reading this story, please be on the lookout of symbolism. Characters and places and things like that are symbolic of other larger things. There is that layer of ambiguity in this short story, in that we don't know the ins and outs of everything. There are going to be questions that are unanswered at the end of this story. There is also an element of foreshadowing here that I want you guys to pay attention to, as well as the tensions between the past and the present. And I mean that both from a historical, pre-Civil War, post-Civil War South, but also this kind of past and present with Emily as a character, who she was in the past and who she, I guess, wasn't in the present, but they're kind of differing perspectives. So, um, I guess I do want to say is look at the past and how you have these people trying to hold on to that ever changing thing that goes on when modern modern times kick in. So that is William Faulkner and A Rose for Emily, and I'm so excited to see what you guys think of this story, because there is a kind of a surprise element of surprise, but also grotesqueness, if you will, to this story. So I can't wait to talk to you guys about it.